myself. This is going to be the easiest sharing ever because there's not an agenda, so it's just about the discussion afterwards. So I'm going to mute myself and hand over to Mike's presentation.
Thank you, Parmjit, and thanks everyone for bearing with us while we've just been waiting for some of the other folks to try and join us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen, and what I'm suggesting is a little process. So that is, I'll do the presentation, I'll take any questions and answer them to the best of my ability. And what I'm suggesting is then there's other documentation, you can flick through the slides again, stuff like that. And if there's any more questions for next week, especially because we don't necessarily have everyone who's normally with us, then what I suggest is that there's final Q&A next week, and then the team make a decision. And there's three realistic decisions, which is one is, yes, we like it and we'll accept it as it is. One is we like parts of it and we'd like to modify it, and one is we don't like it and we'll do something else instead. So if that all sounds a sort of fair little process, then I'll begin to do the screen sharing. Please let me know if the slides stick. We've had that problem before, but can everyone see the slides now? Troy, thumbs up, because I can see you if you can see the slides. Thank you. Okay. So welcome to the presentation on the conscious co-creation tools. And we're starting off with a quote from Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who said collaboration benefits those who choose to collaborate. So we're on the next slide. Can you see that, Troy? Great, thank you. Looks like we're in business this week then. So the aim of the presentation is to cover the differences between highly effective and ineffective organizations. And along the way, we'll be discovering if long-term effectiveness is all about money and resources, or if there is something else in play. That something else is going to help us to identify not just differences, but complete reversals or inversions in approach that define truly effective organizations. And we're going to use that to lay down the foundations of a conscious co-creation model. And what I'm hoping is that absolutely everyone in this group will then end up with much better questions, far better and deeper analysis, a much richer and simpler knowledge of the kind of issues that impact organizations, and a really good idea about some of the solutions that can be applied and shared with other organizations. So the aim is that after this, you can look at any organization, a community or whatever, and using the simple lenses that you've got, ask some really profound questions and go, aha, I know exactly what's going on here, and how it works or how it doesn't work, and what's likely to emerge from that. So the key topics are going to be failure of organization, why it's happening, the solution, which is something called systems thinking, which is about creating holistic organizations which are all joined together. I'm going to give you some examples that we can consider. They're not perfect, none of them are perfect, but what they do show is some quite interesting illustrations of organizations that perform differently, better, and longer than other organizations. And that's going to give us our key foundations for the conscious co-creative model. And then we'll go into a few other things which can be used for an extra skim read or reference, just to help enrich your knowledge even more. So this is the scale of what's actually happening. And these statements were made about 15 years ago. And I can assure you the position is worse now, and it's very shortly going to be quite dramatically worse. So John Hagel said the average life expectancy of a company in the S&P 500 has dropped from 75 years in 1937 to 15 years. And Ellen DeRouge said the average life expectancy of companies in Europe was only 12.5 years. And let's just take a little pause and explore this a little bit more deeply. Those companies in 1937 in the S&P 500 had been through the Wall Street crash, the Great Depression, the First World War. What they didn't have was modern computer systems, real-time data, mobile phones, all the apps, all the systems, everything else that provides a wealth of data and streamed data and informed data to these companies. So that's quite astonishing to me that the scale of the difference is so big, considering the advantages of what are some of the biggest and best resourced entities on the planet. And the best examples from this do come from the corporate world, and the reason for that is this. I've looked at Findhorn, I've looked at Damanhur, I've looked at Oroville, and I've looked at other places, and there's very little evidence that any of them are actually doing any of this stuff. And the result when you look at those organizations is, and I'll just pluck Oroville as the best example, it's the longest so-called sort of conscious community. It's been going for about 50 years. It's supposed to have about 50,000 people, and it's got 2,000 people. And my conclusion is it's stuck. So here is an epic failure. And that is the organizational chart of the UN Environment Programme. And just contemplate, you know, these two need to fit together, and how complex these organizations are. And that complexity in itself is a problem, and how hierarchical they are as well. So what are our motives for paradigm change? Well, Deming said the big problems are where people don't realize they have one in the first place. So we need to be able to ask questions, quite deep and profound questions, and use them as for a process to fuel reflection and consideration about what we're doing, and go to the very foundations of what we're dealing with. Deming was into systems thinking, so was Bucky Fuller. He's probably someone you're much more familiar with. And Deming said learning is not compulsory, but neither is survival. So what are the causes for the failure of organization? And the first one is putting money, profits, and costs before people. And that leads to short-termism and increasing short-termism. What management of organizations are concerned about is mostly money, mostly this quarter's results, the next quarter's results. And because of that, they set all sorts of ridiculous parameters on what they're doing. The bottom line is that short-termism leads to damaging customers. And we've all been customers. Most of us have been members of organizations as well. And if you're a customer, there's a cost to getting you involved. And it's a lot harder and a lot more expensive to bring you back once you've been lost. So underpinning this is a rear view mirror approach to management. It's like driving a car forward, always looking at the historical figures, because that's the only facts that you've got to rely on. And what we need is something that acts much more like a forward-looking radar. And the manifestation of this kind of system and process is that it's beset by hierarchy and command and control. We all know about the pyramidal structure, but there are certain absolutely guaranteed side effects coming out of a pyramidal structure. So hierarchy and command and control creates personality issues, politics, and all sorts of other stuff. And these entities are also driven by changing and arbitrary targets. So there's always something going on, typically driven by an exhortation or slogan with regards to the performance of these kind of organizations. They're also highly resistant to feedback and change, whether it's coming from the customer or from someone within the organization. And that is typically categorized as troublemaking. And they're beset by fear and lack of collaboration. And Deming was really completely synergistic. He was much more involved in organization and in people and things like that than Buckminster Fuller was. But one of the things he said, which was really profound, and I know will resonate with all of you, is one of the key things, or probably the key thing to do in an organization, is to drive out fear. But the bottom line is failure to manage a system as a system. So what is a system? Some people have semantic reactions, knee-jerk reactions to things like words like leadership and organization and structure and things like that. And system is another one of these words. So there's quite a lot that's lumped together. So what we're not talking about is the system. A system is simply something that reacts and acts in a different way to its individual collection of parts. So our body is a system. You've got a liver. It has a very specific function. You have kidneys. They have a very specific function. A heart, that has a different function. But what these different specialist elements end up doing is synergizing together so that the whole body acts in a completely different way from its collection of individual parts. So the oceans are a system, the earth is a system, the universe is a system, and organizations are also systems. Deming said, if you cut off your hand and try to study it, it's not going to act in the same way as if it's connected to your body. And that's really the way most people look at systems. And the irony is that what you end up with is something that's actually much more complicated as a way of looking at organization. But Deming was the guy who went to Japan in about 1950, and he came from a quality management and statistics background. He'd had a profound impact on US war production and things like that. And he spoke to the top 200 manufacturing leaders in Japan after the war. And what he had to say absolutely spellbound his audience. And you can imagine, these are pretty tough people, the captains of industry normally. But what he had to say was so profound, so very, very important that they all wholeheartedly embraced it. And in fact, Deming is credited by the Japanese government, by Japanese manufacturing, etc., as being the creator of the Japanese global manufacturing success after the Second World War. So he's had a massive impact. One of the things he said was, if you don't know the capabilities of a system, there is no point in setting targets, because the system will deliver what the system will deliver. And that makes a lot of sense, I think. But he went on to say something even more profound, which was, and even if you do know the capabilities of a system, there is still no point in setting targets, because the system will deliver what the system will deliver. Now, excuse me, I'm going to mute because I'm going to cough for a second. Good, I'm glad I got that and I didn't deafen you all. So the conclusion is that organizational models and principles have an absolutely huge impact on long-term performance. And that is really what this whole presentation is about. And I'm going to share some examples of organizations that have produced not just long-term survival, but a recognition of quality, which is consistency, really. So Toyota were obviously one of those companies that were inspired by Deming, and if you go into Toyota's head office now, you'll see two pictures on the wall. One is the founder, quite naturally, a guy called Soichiro Toyoda, and the bigger picture next to his is Deming. When we look at Toyota, they've got only 4 levels of management worldwide for an organization with over 300,000 employees. And that is a massive contrast to things like the British civil service, which has over 448,000 employees, and I think about 12 levels of management. So how does it do it? Well, the only way it can do it is by, instead of micromanaging each level of the management structure, it transfers as much of the responsibility down to the ground floor as possible. So the result is, if there is a problem with the manufacturing process, it's not just the supervisor's right, but it's their duty and their responsibility to switch off the production line, get it put right, switch it back on again, and then inform the other supervisors and the management as necessary so that it doesn't happen again. Toyota drifted away from the Deming principles probably about a decade or so ago, and you'll remember, probably that there was some, quite nasty headlines about Toyota. Why? They appointed a new director from outside the company to run the show, a chief executive, and he started to do the same things as the rest of the automotive industry. And what they found was, driving it by numbers, all the rest of it, their performance and their quality started declining, and they had problems, including legal problems as a result of flawed vehicles. Now, if we compare that to Ford, Ford were the world manufacturing leader in cars in the early 1970s. And they came to a crisis point very, very quickly. And over just a few years, suddenly they were hemorrhaging cash. They went to the number 2 supplier position. And what was happening was that literally they were kicking out millions of cars at one end of their factory. And at the other end, hundreds of thousands were coming back in because they were sent out with so many problems associated with those cars. And unlike Toyota, even the main board directors of Ford were absolutely terrified of turning off the production lines and getting things fixed. So the problem ran on and ran on and ran on. And how ridiculous is that? We all know that's ridiculous. We all know that's ludicrously expensive. It damages the customer, it damages the brand and everything. But that's the consequence of running things on the wrong sort of basis. So the result was that Ken Peterson, the CEO of Ford, eventually ended up talking to Deming. There's some famous videos. It's obvious to me that Peterson didn't quite get it, but he was trying to do it, and good on him for doing it. And they improved their performance. Peterson retired. They drifted away from the Deming principles, and the long and the short of it is that their performance started to decline again. So then they went back to them again, and their performance improved again. So we're starting to see some causal relationships between applying these principles and not across 2 companies, Toyota and Ford. The third example is very different, and that's the John Lewis partnership. And they're a partnership. They were started 150 years ago, which is an age for a retailer. And that's what they do. They do retail stuff, and they have a shop called Waitrose and all the rest of it in the UK. But the interesting difference about John Lewis is that they've been not just going for 150 years, but they're co-owned by the staff. And one of the things that happened around the year 2000 was some bright spark said, okay, well, let's float the company, which means sell it on the stock exchange. And these people, the co-owners, the people who stack the shelves, who do the checkout tills, who sweep the floors, etc., voted against it, even though they'd have got something like £150,000 each, which was certainly the average house price in the UK at that time, if not a house price in London. And that, I believe, saved the company. Otherwise, they'd have just been another commercial entity, and they'd have lost everything that was important to them, their culture, etc. So there's another organisation that's been around for much longer than 12.5 or 15 years and done very, very well. Now we've got Gore. Gore make Gore-Tex clothing from the United States. They've been going since the 1950s, and they use self-organising teams. No management at all, for decades, in fact. And the result is that Gore hasn't just succeeded, but they are consistently a top 10 employer in the United States. So they can attract the best people because they're a top 10 employer. Gore did start to implement a level of management by voting for one of their own people to become the chief executive a number of years ago, because they were experiencing then the difficulties of success, which was scaling and manufacturing in other places and things like that. So they do have an element of management now, but they're still using self-organizing teams. Then we've got the Mondragon Cooperative from Spain. They started off in the 1950s producing paraffin lamps, and now there are hundreds of organizations working as cooperatives under the Mondragon banner. They're a top 10 manufacturer in Spain, and they produce things like solar panels using robotics. And then the Zappos. Zappos use holacracy. They're a shoe manufacturer from the United States. And guess what? They happen to be number 2 for customer service in the United States as well. So we're seeing evidence of not just success, but spectacular success across a number of different areas, approached by organizations that are doing things very differently from most organizations. So one of the things that we need to be able to embody is something called the wisdom of the crowd, or the collective consciousness. And this was really discovered by a guy called Sir Francis Galton, who was an English polymath and statistician. who went to a country fair in the early 1900s, so before television, early days of radio. And in those days, these events were bigger than the Olympics. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of people in a much smaller population going for days on end, these country fairs. And what he saw was a guess the weight of the ox competition. And being a statistician, he thought, aha, that's interesting. And he walked through this vast crowd and he saw a large group of farmers and he thought, I think the farmers will have a good idea about the weight of the ox. And then he saw a big bunch of butchers and he thought, I think the butchers will have a good idea about the weight of the ox. But what he did was he averaged up everyone's guess. And his guess was within 2 pounds of the weight of the ox. And it got even more interesting and important for Galton when he discovered that the nearest guesses in each direction, including those from these well-informed farmers and butchers, etc., were over 10 pounds away. So this is something that he called the wisdom of the crowd. Now this principle was just the first example. It's now been evolved into something more sophisticated and much more powerful. But the conclusion is that a large group consistently make better decisions than any small group or individual. We really need to sort of think about that and absorb it a little bit. A large group. So the bigger the group, the better. And the theoretical underpinnings for this are that a large group is diverse, and that gives it mathematical effectiveness or efficacy. But it also needs to be independent. This is not about, say, grabbing the Conservative Party from the UK or the Labour Party from the UK or the parliamentarians of those parties or even the whole electorate necessarily. These people need to be independent in order for this principle to work. The next thing is it needs to be decentralized. And what that means in practice is that you still have the ability to harness the knowledge of the independent experts and the local knowledge as well. But all that expertise is delivered within a context. And finally, the whole thing needs to be structured. And if we do that, what we're actually not doing is averaging. We're not averaging. What we're doing is we're avoiding mediocrity by averaging errors out. So this is a really important and profound principle that is only harnessed to a limited extent by a lot of these organizations, even the successful ones I've already mentioned, and almost not at all by other organizations. But it is harnessed to a certain extent by things like direct democracies. So I think it's quite interesting and pertinent that, for example, Switzerland has a direct democracy. It's a limited one, and guess what? They're very, very rich. And part of their success has been built on the fact that they did not engage in countless pointless wars over the last 100 years or so, including the First World War and the Second World War. So what are the keys to a conscious co-creative organization? The analogy that I draw is that our ancestors have been successfully sailing seas and oceans, trading for tens of thousands of years. And they did it in very, very primitive equipment, in very dangerous conditions, which still overwhelm ships in modern days. So how did they do it? The first thing is intention. They agreed what they were going to do together and where they were going to do it. The second thing is they had an appropriate structure to get them there, a boat or a ship. And the third thing is they had an ability to allow for the actions of the wind and the waves along the way to provide feedback so that they could adjust course constantly, because it was pretty near 100% likely that they were never on a perfect course from the moment they left one port until they arrived at their destination. If we use that as a lens or a series of lenses for viewing organization, then it's time to compare this against how most organizations work. And what we see when we look at most organizations is that the intention is not still. It's constantly shifting. It's sales this month. It's costs next month. It's customer service the next month. So the intention is moving, it's not still. The structure is the pyramid, and that's hierarchical, it's divisive, it's political, and it manifests all sorts of control and personality issues within that structure. And the process within these organizations is highly resistant to feedback. Feedback, whether you're a customer or whether you're a member of staff, is extremely unwelcome a lot of the time and categorized as troublemaking. And if we apply that way that the intention, structure, and process are used back to our ship, then we'd be crashing into the harbor wall before we even left port. And that's this slide. But we're going to go back at a moment, and we're just going to look at the pyramid, because of what happens in a pyramid. In the pyramid shape, what happens is that the power is aggregated at the top. The people who are interested in the power are attracted to the top. They're highly self-interested, highly competitive people, and they end up building their own little sub-pyramids within the organization. And that means that in their quest to get to the top, these people are not at all averse to passing on problems, costs, and difficulties to the other departments within the organization. So it ends up being internally competitive. And in those organizations, you often hear people complaining about other departments and how we're better or we're their victims and all that sort of thing. So the manifestations are detachment from the people who do the work to the people who tell them what to do. Politics, personality, disempowerment, and all sorts of other cascading problems leading naturally from a pyramidal structure. So what are the key elements of a systems thinking organization? Well, we've already covered the first three, which are intention, structure, and process. And hopefully now you understand how important those three things are, how absolutely fundamental it is to get those three things right. And if you do, it acts like a three-legged stool, and it gives you a way of constantly improving and evolving. The next steps, though, to add are a vision, which is in corporate terms what they call the key performance indicators, which is only really what is really important to us. And what do those things look like when we get there in an ideal world? Because we need to know, we know where we are already, but we need to know where we're going, and we need to be able to share it with each other as well. And if we do that, then we're now in position to be able to create a strategy and a plan to actually get there. So a strategy is the all-encompassing idea of how we're going to get there, and the plan is, okay, well, if we're here and we're going to there, what needs to happen first? What preparation needs to be done for that step beforehand? And what needs to come second, third, and fourth, etc. And it needs to be something that is flexible as well, because plans are essential. How many of you could cope with putting together an IKEA wardrobe or chest of drawers or something without the instructions? How many of you struggle with a Japanese VCR manual, for example? I do, or a computer manual or something like that. So there tends to be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction against things like plans, but they're absolutely essential, because if not, we're not going to do anything together as a group, or anything which has any complexity. And finally, how do we build consciousness into the organization itself, so that we're not just improving, say, the building of a straw bale house or the marketing of the World Summit and the pulling in of more people, but how do we improve the process of the process and the structure and the structure and the organization of the organization, so that we ideally only make one mistake one time and use that constantly to learn and improve and get better and better at what we're doing. So all this now brings in our next lens of viewing organization, which is what Lao Tzu said 2,500 years ago, which is, be still as a mountain and flow like a great river. And if we contemplate that, what we see is that the intention, which should be like a guiding star for an organization, and still is moving. And the things that should be flowing in an organization, like the process built on feedback, are still and stuck, calcified and resistant to change. So that gives us another great way of looking at organisation. And it really explains what looks to be quite a puzzling sort of statement by Lao Tzu. But how profound is that vision? So here's just a quick example of an intention, because it shouldn't be complicated. It should in fact be quite simple and straightforward. A few bullet points or a couple of paragraphs. So let's take a community as an example, because our organisation should be kind of like a community, shouldn't it? So it's our intention to create an empowered community where individual creativity and sovereignty is valued. It's our intention to work wisely by using proven, safe technologies for our key community needs. It's our intention to create abundance by creating more than we need, flipping costs into income. It's our intention to cover the key issues of food, water, waste, buildings, energy, and health essentials in an exemplary way for the good of people and planet. So I think that gives you quite a good condensed view of, wow, this is what this community is trying to achieve. The next element is structure. And I've put in some slides as a demonstration here because some people truly believe that nature is not structured. But nature is absolutely, completely, totally, and utterly structured. So these are physics calculations of body length versus body mass from algae through to all sorts of bigger creatures. And what you see is a really, really tight correlation. That's structured. This is the radius of the aorta in a heart versus body weight. And the same scaling applies for the scaling of tree trunks, from a mouse through to an ox, including man. There's another straight line. Now we have lifespan versus body mass for mammals, invertebrates, and birds. Another strong correlation. Metabolic rate, heart rate versus body weight, again for a mouse through to an ox. Bang. So nature is very highly structured. The key is, what kind of structure do we need for what we're aiming to achieve? And we need to bring consciousness into our structure because we need different structures for different purposes. Because they don't all do the same thing. I'm going to cover corpus structures in here because it may be something that if there is a will to do this, what we all need to understand is as the group grows bigger, it may decide to do things differently from the way that people have thought about in the past. That's one of the things about the collective consciousness. We have to surrender to it. We have to surrender our egos and trust that we are bound together by a higher intention. So corpus structures is the first part of structures, and that's driven by specialist functions. There are trusts used for privacy and used for ownership of assets, from IP through to land, through to buildings and things like that. Then there's LLCs, limited liability companies. They're used for trading to protect the interests of the shareholders so they don't lose too much money if an entity goes down. Then there's a cooperative. That's something that's co-owned for operations via its members. Then we've got foundations, which are not for profits, and charities, which are supposed to be about raising money for other people. And what we find is there's quite a lot of abuse going on among all of these kind of structures. But nevertheless, I think it's important to bring it to consciousness. So just to give you one example, charities are absolutely riven by self-interest, by fraud, and some of the biggest charities in the US and the world, in fact, only give tiny percentages to the people that they're supposed to be raising money for. And instead, the management and the CEOs have enormous fat cat salaries. But the point of this is that if we bring that level of consciousness to these things about what is it, if it acts like an organ, what is it designed to do, and what are its strengths and weaknesses, then we needn't necessarily be thinking about one standalone structure. We could think about things strung together, acting like organs of a body for a specific purpose. Now let's look at human structure, which I know is going to be a lot more interesting to a lot of you. So what kind of human structure features are we aiming to embed in our organization? Well, mutuality, of course, and co-ownership, involvement and stability. And all of that comes together within the collective consciousness, because this is designing an entity that works both with human nature and with nature. And when we draw our inspiration from nature, what we see is that nature manages to create and maintain balance all the time, but it is also all the time innovating. So how do we embed all of those structure features together? And the answer is circles. So this circle represents, it could be our group, it could be the whole world, it could be a community, whatever. And the key is that all of these people are going to be making all of the key decisions. Now, when you get an organization that grows, as the World Summit is, then what you typically end up with is a smaller group in the middle dealing with all of the most important or most general or most strategic issues for that organization. So let's call this the central strategy team. Now, if that team is there telling everyone else what to do, what are we doing? We're recreating the pyramid again, and we know that that's not going to work. But the intention of this organization is that those are just recommendations and plans and offerings, and they go out to the outside of the organization, and it is the bigger group that makes the decisions and other recommendations and asks questions and modifies the plans and rejects the plans if necessary. And that flows back into the middle again. So what we're creating now is the most basic flow in nature, which is how atoms actually work. If we extend this model, then probably what we're going to end up on a community basis is other groups specializing in things like the buildings, the food, the water, the waste, the healthcare, the education facilities, the social facilities, etc. And if they're also going to be electing a chair to the group, then they really need to sit in the middle so that everyone, all of those people involved in those organizations can say, this is what we're recommending, this is what we're doing, and have that exchange so that everything can be tied together. This is also really important. So we can be expanding this around the outside, and as you see in this example, what we've got then is the food subdivided in the people, another group who may be specializing in outdoor food, another with indoor food, etc. But what are we creating? The flower of life. And that is another natural structure that we're embedding into this organization. And here's the proof. Because the top image is the first ever image of a hydrogen atom's orbital structure, and the bottom image shows individual atomic bonds inside a molecule. So this is absolutely grounded in the world that we live in. So what are the processes for harnessing the collective consciousness? I'm proposing 3. One is the energy circle. The energy circle is pretty much like how we work. It's when we get into a project sense, what it means is if we're discussing the IT requirements for a group, for the group, for example, then Matt will put in some ideas. William will come in with some additional points or some questions. Someone else will come in with something. And it's completely random, but it's those who've got the questions in the moment, the personal, professional expertise and knowledge, those who have the inspiration, and those who have the intuition can all move forward with this. And once a concept is agreed, then it means that the focus of the group is to constantly improve what's on the table. And if someone doesn't like it, then it's their job to put something better on the table, because I don't like it is one of the ultimate sort of blocking methodologies. So that's designed for very quick progress, and it's designed to be chaired, and the chair is there really to facilitate in terms of making sure that everybody gets heard. The next one is completely different though, and most of you will be familiar with this as well. It's the listening circle, and it has a very different purpose, because if the energy circle gets stuck, it can get stuck on semantics or someone's emotional reaction to something or whatever. Then what we need to do is to have a very trust building environment so that those people can be encouraged to explain how they're feeling about things. Other people can explain as well, and that goes round in a rigid order. Not everyone has to speak, but the tradition is that it goes around 3 times and everyone can speak for as long as they like. But the aim is that there are some stages to go slow and there are some stages to go fast. And we need different tools for dealing with different situations. Because if this was all about the energy circle, which I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, oh, that sounds great, we won't waste a lot of time on that, then there is a tendency for people to want to sweep things under the carpet and not actually deal with them. And unless we deal with them, then they're going to sit there and they're going to fester and they pop out unexpectedly as politics or personality issues and stuff like that, because people can get very, very frustrated if they don't feel that they're being listened to or understood. The third one is an action learning circle. And an action learning circle is typically involving about 6 to 8 people. And they use an action. It could be like us using the creation and the development of the World Summit to discuss problems and how we deal with them and stuff like that. So there are some specific rules to these groups, but one of them is that there's someone called a set advisor who supports that group, and they just chip in things from time to time. But the intention is it's not brainstorming. It is not, okay, well, let me explain my problem to you folks, and someone pops up and goes, okay, if I was you, I'd do this. Because if we do that, we might as well pack up and go home. The action learning circle is very different. What it's about is people acting as coaches and mentors and questioners on a very deep level to help someone to unlearn something and to peel back the layers of the onion so that we can unlearn and we can evolve and do things in a completely different way. So the action learning circle is something that everyone acts like the coach, everyone acts like the mentor, everyone acts like the person who's being coached and mentored, and the set advisor pops in from time to time to say things like, what about just reflecting for a few minutes instead of just instantly responding? What about rephrasing that as a question? What about instead of saying, if I was you, I'd do it this way, you rephrase that as a question. And in that way, what ends up is, you might think this is a complete waste of time, but this is used by major corporations who are absolutely tight-assed about the use of the time of their senior staff and people like that. And they use it because they end up with a massively empowered team environment and much, much stronger people who have been able to unlearn successfully and do things completely differently. There are a number of principles underpinning all of these things as well, including things like the Toltec principles, which are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, always do your best, and by all means be skeptical, but learn to listen. So we have a number of team agreements underpinning these, including things like take responsibility. Because if you want to be treated responsibly, you've got to act responsibly. So take responsibility for yourself, for your actions, for your emotions, and for dealing with the team issues. Because the process only works if the team, and the intention are supported. So what I'm recommending is team decisions and not consensus. But we can try more than one option. So why not consensus? Well, consensus really only works in specific groups, specific situations, and specific circumstances. So you're not going to have a consensus meeting if the US cavalry is coming over the hill and you're a tribe of Indians. You're going to be getting straight on your horses and running away or fighting them or whatever. Consensus typically only works in tribal groups and religious groups, and even then there are situations where people are excluded. It could be people who are so far in their ego that they're out of balance, that they are intoxicated by drugs or alcohol, they're having some kind of a mental episode or something like that, and that's their responses, that those people are excluded. But the aim is that we are also given an ability to bring real issues to the table and not avoid them, have a proper discussion, come to a proper resolution. Along the way, we can avoid a lot of conflict that happens and besets most organizations. We've also got ways of dealing with conflict as and when it does arise. And we can use the principles of non-violent communication along the way as well. Though, you know, anyone who's tried to use this stuff knows it's not easy. That's difficult. But it helps if we go into a specific environment where we know it's expected of us, and we're going to have a listening circle now. So now I'm going to have to listen to the person that I really didn't want to listen to. And they're going to have to listen to me as well. But the aim is that that builds trust and understanding. So we can also use self-organizing teams within these processes, but the general gist is that they will elect a chair to serve the group, to focus on the group's intention, to value everybody's time, and to communicate the information coming from the group to other groups as needed. And that is the circle chair, and they act as what's known as a servant leader. And this principle is even embedded in places like, you know, the British Army and the Royal Military Academy, though it's not always the way that it's idealized, the way that they roll it out, of course. They're responsible for the group's intention. They're responsible for supporting the group energy flow. They're responsible for making sure that everyone gets heard. And when the group gets stuck, they're responsible for helping to create bridging solutions, which is, okay, you want to build a straw bale house, you want to build a dome, we've got the resources to do both, so why don't we do both? And if we're building 20 houses, then we can take the experience of, is one definitely superior to the other, and then make a group decision accordingly along the way. So it's something also that enables us to value the inputs of the individual people involved. The next role is an administrator or secretary, whose role is support in terms of admin, briefing, preparing, recording information from the group as well. So the kind of values that we're trying to embed here are that trust, which simply means that people can count on us, because you're not going to trust me if I don't do as I say and say as I do. If I say I'm going to do a presentation for you, I'll do a presentation for you and I'll prepare for it. Openness to learning, because we're going to have to unlearn stuff, and that's really not easy, but we can do it if we make a commitment to it. Transparency, which is honesty, what's really going on. Sharing success equally. Respect, not just for each other, but for the environment. And another great piece of Deming is examples without theory invite mindless copying, and that's the way the vast majority of organizations are working. So the aim is that if we can embody those kind of values in the organization, then we're acting consciously, systematically, and with intent. So now let's look at the vision items. Typical vision items for a community. Again, I'm just giving you as an example because I didn't want to start to predefine anything to do with this organization. And that's why I took the IT elements out as well, because that would be dishonoring the people who are dealing with IT to start to put forward suggestions, because I think that there's a group been agreed to define that, and those people really need to be able to do their thought and their deliberation to do a job. So I've taken the examples of food, water, waste, energy, healthcare, etc. And in an ideal world, what do they look like when we get there? So we now know what we're aiming for. We can communicate it, we can share it, we can question it, and the key items are also defined and grounded. So we could have an overarching vision as well, which is our measure of success is to change the model on a long-term basis, to inspire others and help them to do it for themselves, and to create a fractal that can self-govern and join together on a level playing field of common values. So now we know where we are and we know where we're going, so we can create our plan. And that is what steps are needed, in what order, what comes first, and what needs to be prepared in advance. And we can also contemplate a strategy, which is less direct than a plan, but more holistic. It's something that covers the whole concept delivery. And finally, then we need to be able to build the collective consciousness into the organization itself. And this is where things like the action learning circle come in. Because if we plan things and we do things, but we don't reflect upon those actions and act upon that information, then we're not actually capable of evolving unless it's done by some sort of an accident. So the aim is that we actively seek feedback, and that's a complete reversal from most organizations, and opportunities for development and learning on an individual basis and on a group basis. And we treat mistakes as opportunities for continual improvement. And to do that, we need to recognize the gift potential. So the suggestion is that this is done regularly, preferably at least once a month, that we get together and we go, not just how did that creation of a newsletter go, but how did our processes work? How did our structure work? How can we constantly improve them? So the aim is that the collective consciousness gathers information that is tangible and measurable, yeah, but it's also human and intangible. It's the opinions, it's the perceptions, it's the intuition from both inside and from outside an organization. And it's regularly scheduled to become a habit, to identify areas for constant improvement and innovation. And this is really important, because if it only happens when we recognize that we've got a problem, then it all becomes associated with a problem rather than an opportunity for really reflecting on what we're doing and how we constantly improve it. We can go further. The model of sustainable organization, unlike the conscious co-creation tools, does not have a stepping off point. It's just a load of articles as a model on leadership, management, learning, etc. There's a lot of Deming in there, and I created a notes version, which is very, very brief. But I think if most of you just had a skim of those notes, then you'd be raising your eyebrows and probably smiling quite a bit, going, I can see now what Deming meant by management don't know what they're doing. So there's the notes, the digest in the book, and a YouTube introductory video which is available. Or you could just Google Dr. W. Edwards Deming and systems thinking. So I want to just produce a quick summary. Why do we need to do this? We need to do it because the organization is failing. There are absolutely common errors, absolute lack of knowledge, leading to mindless copying. And that mindless copying needs not just changing, but it needs to be completely inverted. Systems thinking is proven in quite a number of wide situations, but it is not widely known. So we're lucky to be able to know about it. People like William know about it as well. And what systems thinking shows is the examples and the exceptions that prove the rule and prove the methodology. And in order to get this right, actually all we need is something that's quite simple. We must get the foundations right. And if we get the foundations right, especially of intention, structure, and process, we've got a way of addressing the inversions and creating an organization that can constantly evolve. And if we do that, we can also empower others and collaborate. So I'm finishing with one more quote by Buckminster Fuller this time. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And this is one option for us to do that within this organization. So thank you. I shall stop sharing. Okay, I think we should go straight to questions. I know some of you have heard that before. Some of you have already produced absolutely brilliant questions for me. But who has any questions or comments that they want to share from the presentation?
Well, I love it, Mike. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah. I looked at the material beforehand, you know, a couple of weeks ago, so I've had some time to absorb it, and yeah, I really love it actually. Yeah.
Great, Richard, and it's free, so share it as well. You know, if you want to use it in your organization or other people that you meet, then do so, because this is some of the most powerful stuff I think that we can share with people. It's, you know, this is, if we're going to make a better world, then the more we do for free is like casting seeds out there, and the stuff that works is going to work and it's going to take. So thank you, Richard.
No, thank you. And I think the word that always comes to me is empowering, you know, and how no one should be afraid of this, because it empowers them to contribute in a way that they want to. And you know, that's what so many people seek, isn't it? To have a voice and to contribute in a meaningful way, rather than just turn up and do as you're told, when you frequently know that it's pointless. So, it really makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Has anyone else got any questions or comments?
Yes, Mike. I would like to bring in two things that sort of inspired me to. Thank you for the presentation. It's really great. Well done. So I love it but you already know this, how profound you created this one. At some point you shared with us that if you don't know the capabilities, and no one sort of intrigues me, because, well, you talked about it later in the presentation, that the World Summit or the event, or it's about the wisdom, right? The wisdom of the crowd, the collective consciousness. And I think within our consciousness, we do see and understand that all this potential is out there in the field. We know we have the capabilities, but we don't know where and how to connect them yet, maybe. So this is one point I wanted to bring to the awareness. Like, so is it really this statement that you make? Is it really like this, or do we feel that if we can see and understand this potential, that we still can set targets and get there?
Wow, my goodness, I'd love you in any audience that I present to, Robert, because I think those are just brilliant questions. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to speak once.
Yeah.
Yeah, the presentation was like really helpful, and yeah, like I came to know about many stuffs again. So when I was going through the failure of organization slide, there was like rear view mirror management. So yeah, like I wanted to know more about it. What is like rear view mirror management?
Okay, thank you, Neha. What I'm going to do.
Can I just ask? Do you want like a collection of like 2 or 3 questions, and then you want to do it, or do you want to do it one at a time, Mike?
I'll do it one at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with Robert's question first of all, and then I'll come back to yours as well, because then that means also that Robert can come back to me straight away and ask any sort of supplementary questions. So yeah, Robert, I think there's 2 ways I can answer this, and 2 ways I need to answer this as well with regards to setting targets. The first one is the spiritual or the metaphysical, which is that, I work with people like quantum physicists and stuff like that. There was a professor of quantum physics on our team, and it's just, it's so profound hearing about how the universe really works and intention and stuff like that. And one of the things I've learned is that if we want to manifest something, a lot of people believe, everything is about intention, and they're correct. But there's more to it than that. My understanding is that if we want to manifest something, what we need to do is to be able to commune with the universe effectively and sit back and relax and go out of fight or flight and stress and get back into balance and center ourselves. And we get into a place of absolute perfect peace, where we're now able to access a universal field, if you like. And if we do that, then we can send out a feeling of gratitude, like something's already happened. And what we do then is we send the intention that whatever we're trying to manifest has already happened as well. But then we let it go. We don't try and hold on to it and go, I'd really love to create a bank. And I want it to be like this. It's like, then we've got to let it go, because the next thing is someone's going, actually, we could create a credit union or something. No. I've set my sights on a bank, and it's going to be like this kind of thing. And that's, the universe teaches with resonance and irony. So very often what it's doing is it's giving us what we think we don't want. And it's doing it like a cosmic joke, and then we're getting all infuriated about it, and that's irony. Whereas resonance, you all know as well, I'm sure, in that I was feeling so good today and everything happened perfectly. I had the most brilliant conversations. Everything was just clicking together. And my goodness, this person knows that person, and they're already creating a bank, for example. So the setting of targets doesn't happen in terms of our spiritual world and our quantum manifestation. It is more like we need to find something with ourselves to become the creator, and then we need to let it go and trust the universe that we've just sent the right signal to be able to attract that thing into our lives. And what we need to be aware of is that blinkered vision, which is, well, you know, what I'm hearing is not really what I wanted, but actually the universe has already delivered what you specified, if you like, and now maybe it's our blinkers or my prejudice or my feelings against something or someone or whatever that is wanting me to push that away. Whereas if maybe I was more balanced and relaxed, I could go, okay, I've got everything that I want. There's a brilliant book on this by Dr. DeMartini called A Quantum Collapse, but I think what we're dealing with is much simpler and much more direct now. Yes, in terms of organizations, let me answer it the other way. There's no point setting targets. Let me have a quick cough. Let's deal with something like an aquaponics system as an example. So one of the things you'll see in MOSO is something called statistical process control. And that may sound to be completely irrelevant for all of us, but if you're running a process like fish growing and you're using the water from the fish to fertilize and to water your fruit and your vegetables that you're growing indoors or outdoors, then you've got a system. And you might think, well, you know, if I feed the fish a bit more, they'll produce more crap and I can grow more plants. But it doesn't work like that, because if you overfeed the fish, then you stress the fish. So the art is to let the system be and work out what are the normal parameters for a system, because actually when we look at it, a system fluctuates. And so when I see these movies on people in offices or the reality TV shows, which are, you know, is rare as rocking horse droppings nowadays, but when I see something like that and the figures have come in and the boss is really upset and he's throwing everything around and, you know, everyone is getting blasted, then I think about this stuff, and then I see, you know, later on in the film that they're all standing on their desks and cheering because the sales results are back up again. Well, every business, every system has its own natural fluctuations, and it's the most important thing to understand what are the boundaries of those normal fluctuations, because if we don't, and if we're the management of the system, then if we get all upset about the sales being down, but hey, we're in the business of selling Christmas cards and it's January, it doesn't work. We can destabilize the system. Or the sales are, you know, enormous now for our Christmas tree business, and it's maybe, you know, September or something like that. Then again, there's no point standing up and cheering. What we need to identify is when we're moving outside the boundaries of a stable system. And that's like the universe going, knock, knock. Now there's something to investigate. Now there is something to ask questions about. So targets are deeply insidious for an organization. They can be very, very destabilizing. They can be very unsupportive of the staff. And they prevent us from peeling back a layer of the onion to say what's going on. So if your top salesman is suddenly having a terrible month, then probably what he doesn't want is you shouting and screaming at him, and he probably doesn't even want to tell you, if you're shouting and if you're prone to shouting and screaming at him, that maybe he's got a terrible family problem and his wife is ill and there's problems with the children and stuff like that. Whereas if you were operating, and this is the beauty of a lot of this stuff, is it's actually operating in reverse. And if you were operating in reverse, going, hey, do you want to come and see me? Come and have a cup of coffee. How is everything? You know, is everything all right at home? Well, actually, no, it isn't. Oh, okay. How can I help? Well, you know what? If things are that stressful, there's no point in you being at work. Can you cancel all of your appointments for the next 2 weeks and take that time off and spend it with your family? What are you going to get? You're going to get someone who's able to focus on his short-term crisis issues in his life and hopefully help to support the family and deal with that. You're also going to get someone who is more than happy to tell you when he's got a problem. And you're also going to get someone who's going to go around and tell absolutely everyone else what a fantastic boss he's got. And what you're going to get is the whole morale of the organization is going to go up. So targets are a very, very insidious thing. What I think we need to do is, when it comes to not just targets but other information from people, is to treat it as information. And if we're having a major emotional reaction to something, bless you, then we need to understand that actually that's our reaction to something, and very typically the power of our reaction is related to something that's happened in the past. So how often have you seen a YouTube video where someone is completely losing it at an airport or something like that, but what else is going on with that person? What has happened in that person's day? What is happening in that person's life? What has happened to that person as a child, maybe to make them shout and scream as a child in a stressful situation for them? So if we get better at observing information and go, oh, hang on a second, I've got a program running here, then we can detach from it. We don't need to pile loads of energy into that stuff. We could go, I just need a bit of time out to sort of center myself and go, all right, that's a program. That's not part of me. Okay, I can crack on again now. Does that answer your question well, Robert?
Thanks, Mike. Yes, it's a great recap and answer and reply. Thanks. I can only give back to you that probably, as I experience these fluctuations that you're referring to, that those are probably the challenges that the things we find most challenging. And I totally see that it's about trusting and surrendering, and at some point centering yourself, not trying to force things. So, but thank you. I will give the floor to other people now. Thanks for your answer.
Pleasure, mate. Yeah, and what you said, I want to reflect on that very quickly, in that, you know, what it reminds me of is what people are taught to do when they're in life-threatening drowning situations. What people try to do is keep their bodies as high out of the water as possible and flap like hell, and they get exhausted in seconds, and the next thing is they're going right under the water. But if you apply the opposite and you pull yourself under and allow the buoyancy to push you up, then you need to apply far less effort to allow that to happen. If you're caught in a rip current or something, you know, do you fight the current? If you're in major waves, do you fight the waves? No. So if you're feeling that, don't fight it. Try and flow with it, and try and just detach and understand what's happening is my tip. So that came to mind. Thank you, Robert. Nia, can you repeat your question, please? Nia? You still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, so like, yeah, I was asking about like I just clicked a pic of it. Yeah, so just please wait. So yeah, we were like, I was going through the failure of the organization. There it was rear view mirror management.
Mm.
Yeah, like what is that about?
Okay. The figures are such a big thing for especially the big organizations and governments and things like that. And the thing is, the figures are always measuring something in the past.
Yeah.
And that is used as a guide to the future behavior. So yeah, they make a big hoo-ha about it. It's always based on, you know, who did what last, and the big organizations are the worst in the world for this. And I guess it's just the way their system works. The system is about money. That is the parameter. the parameter of time against money is always the one that they're measuring by. And that then creates enormous pressure, because the institutional shareholders like the banks and stuff like that then start leaning on the company, saying, you know, we want better performance and we want a more aggressive CEO. And, you know, that's the way the system is now. It is much more that way than it was in the past. And I think in the past, when we go back to the 1937 example, they didn't have all those advantages, but they had the advantages of knowing their customers and talking to people. And so, yeah, that's what I mean by review management, review mirror approach to management. It's the key things for those organizations are always figures, and those figures are always historical. And they distract from running a system as a system.
Thank you, Mike, for answering.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions or comments they would like to share? Okay.
Mark,
Yes,
I'd like to ask a question in regard to consensus. I was quite surprised by seeing consensus as something that's not necessarily required. And I understood why in this particular presentation, on the basis that the individuals who, as you say, could be on you know, in a bad situation or under some influence, etc. But I'm kind of still feeling that unless that's part of the process of actually reaching a place where you've got a functional structure going, in a functional structure of resonance, I guess, for one achieving resonance, you're going to effectively constantly have consensus coming through if you've got resonance. So does not resonance supersede consensus? Or does consensus kind of like fit in with resonance? Maybe that's a better way.
Okay, great question, Ketan. I'd like to give you a couple of examples.
Can you repeat the question? I can't understand.
Okay, Ketan was talking about being surprised about my thoughts on consensus, and you know, is that superseded by resonance? So let's deal with the consensus one first of all. I want to give you some examples. So I ended up chairing, pretty much by accident, the first international quality group for digital photography, digital images, graphic artwork, things like that. And it was all the right explosive mixture for a highly political and long-term exercise, and personal and frustrating and all the rest of it. So there were representatives of trade bodies there were scientists there were quality management people there were representatives of major corporations there, you know, Adobe, DuPont, Epson, things like that. And I set up the group exactly along this way, because what I realized immediately was that I was absolutely by far the thickest, most ill-informed person on the group. And I had to be able to rely on those people. So the first thing I said was, okay, folks, this is your group. I'm going to try and help you by making sure that everyone gets heard, by keeping our focus on positive solutions, because I don't like politics. And that means you're going to make the decisions, basically. End of exercise. And one organization kept on sending 3 people to the meetings, and it quickly became apparent that what they were trying to do was to push their commercial agenda. And once they realized this, that they couldn't actually influence me at all, because I was the least powerful person on the group, I didn't even have a vote, then what that meant was that they, in actual fact, would have to stack the group to such an effect that they put over 50% of the people into any of the meetings. And if that was to happen, then actually all the others could start playing the same game, and we'd have had, we'd have had 100 people in no time. And thankfully we didn't. But what did happen was really interesting to me. Those 3 people didn't just set aside their commercial agenda and focus on the higher intention of the group. but they kept on sending those 3 people to the meetings. So there was a complete adjustment in their approach, and they moved into a higher resonance, or a higher frequency, if you like, and set all their self-interested stuff aside and said, this is going to be great for our industry and our customers and everyone else. And that was fantastic, and it was a real credit to them. Equally, I've seen this in community environments where one person couldn't set aside their ego. And I've seen it cause just massive amounts of disruption. Because I'm a professional and I've seen this and I know that, and the problem is they're on a program and they've gone into a broadcast mode instead of a listening mode, and unless you can actually encourage them into a secure environment to do things like the listening circle, you're not going to get anywhere. And typically what you get after the shouting is then the sound of the door slamming and the footsteps going away. And my feeling is that that's also working in exactly the way that it's supposed to work. Because we can have all these mechanisms in place to support people personally and in terms of a group and being listened to, etc. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. But if they don't want to avail themselves of it, you can't make them. We can only lead our horses to water. And at the same time, you can't have the whole group being bent around that one person or a small group, ultimately. So as long as I think the things are there to offer that support, then it's up to the individual. If not, we're actually starting to step back into totalitarianism, which is not about how do we agree, how we work together, and what are the parameters of our level playing field, but now we're getting into me or someone else or a group of people telling other people what to do. And I think that's quite an insidious slope to get on. So ultimately, this is about voluntaryism. It's about how we make sure that everyone else gets heard, and we also need to be careful of what we wish for, because if we do wish for consensus, then we might get into the situation that we've seen at a place local to here, or even places like Findhorn or Oroville and stuff like that, where actually what happens is they end up stuck like concrete for years and years and years. And they keep doing the same thing in the same way, and they can't possibly achieve better results. So the difference, I think, between that and resonance is that, and if I realize I'm not going to get my own way, and we all have to realize this, we got to look at all these things and go, what's the flip side of this? Well, the flip side of this is it's not my group, it's our group. And while I might be entitled to be heard, I'm not always going to get my way. And that means maybe some of my preconceptions and assumptions aren't going to apply. And I have to be humble enough to put my ego to one side and go, okay, does the intention still resonate with me? In which case I'm going to have to swallow it. Maybe it'll change in the future. And maybe without that encouragement, then we're more liable to be, stuck in our egos. And I think the most dangerous one for me is spiritual superiority. I've heard it so many times that people are communing with angels and this, that, and the other, and it's used as a complete and utter block to say, I have a better connection to the universe or to God or whatever you want to describe it as than anyone else. And on that basis, I'm right and you're, either another archangel or you're the devil kind of thing. And again, that's really, sorry, we have to be a heck of a lot more humble than that. Yeah, so resonance. Back to what I was saying earlier on, Ketan, and that is that resonance is what we attract, and we don't always attract when we're desperately trying for something not to happen. Sometimes that's the very thing that we attract. Why? Because we're putting an emotional energy into it. So yeah, I think what is really the big challenge for us as human beings is to step back into discernment and go, that's just information. How I'm reacting to that is an energy thing within me, Does that tell me that I need to do something to try and just deal with that? Is there someone around who I can talk with, or who can listen to me, or who can give me some advice as to how I can deal with that kind of stuff? And you know, I described this earlier on to someone as there's a big thing among these conscious movements to, you know, to look through the trash. To me, it's like, take out the trash. Okay, take out the trash, recognize I've taken out the trash, and that's my trash. I've observed it, I've waved it a hearty goodbye. If it comes back again, then I'm just going to take it out again and maybe try and do something else. But what I'm not going to do is spend the next 3 weeks peering through the trash in close detail, because I don't think that does me any good. So resonance, observation of energy as information, and the ability to detach from that is really, really important. And to recognize that if we're getting something that we don't really expect, then okay, how are we going to deal with it? How am I going to deal with it? And especially in an organization, how do we actually lift up the carpet, bring it out, get the discussion, deal with it, and then take it outside? So I don't know if that answers your question very directly, Keitan, because there's been a few different sort of analogies I brought in, but I think consensus is really dangerous because all it needs is one person or a small group of people to be completely off balance or attached to things and upset by their attachment to things, and it can send the whole thing pear-shaped. And I think this is a valuable, you know, exchange and discussion now. But hopefully, if we can have these kind of discussions, it saves us from having to go through a heck of a lot more work later on. So hopefully, that's the best answer I can give you, unless you've got a follow-up, Keitan.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's just so interesting to actually, as you said, there's this crossover of different things that occur in a resonance space. It's given me some food for thought in terms of the point of consensus, because I always had in my mind that we would concede to being in resonance. So I guess it's one and the same thing. If you're here, you've actually conceded, and if you are here, you're going to get resonance. So I feel that in the transparency of things, that effectively it's a process that you arrive at actually coming into this structure and accepting that, you know, this is what it requires. So thank you very much for that, because that was a bit insight, and it does support the principle of transparency and yeah, making this thing happen. So thank you for the structure behind what for me sort of seemed to sort of come naturally, but yet you see it's the structure of it, because that's the part that is always so important in terms of facilitating, or being able to actually facilitate this kind of interaction. So thank you, Mark.
Great, thank you, Keitan. And I just want to add one more thing. It's like this. You're looking at me, I'm looking at you folks, and it all looks absolutely perfect in our vision, whether we've got glasses or not. But we've all got blind spots. You folks are going to help me so much more to identify my blind spots, because to me they're blind spots. I can't see them. And sometimes I can't even see if I'm off balance a little bit. So this is where this group element really comes in terms of us being able to spot the other things. And sometimes it's a left field question, sometimes it's shock, but you know, then quite often that's the biggest gift, which is, you know, sorry, we're sailing in that direction, and see that thing, that's the rocks. So, you know, it's not always what we want to hear, but sometimes it's really, really useful stuff. So yeah, anyone got any more questions?
Yes, me. I have a question. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Well, you say, I see you and you see me. That is a Mayan phrase, in Nakesh Alakin. I am you, you are me. So that could be like a principle for the things that you were saying. My question is, you mentioned something about the flower of life. So can you give us examples on which kind of activities or how we can put this like in action? Because, okay, I understood the concept, but I want to know how in the daily way, or with which kind of activities we can do that kind of performance, the flower of life, how we can create the synergy within all the areas.
Okay, great question. I think here's one way I'd be looking at it. Let's take the example of this group. What I think is really important is that this central group has the representatives of all of the other groups, and especially deals with strategy. So, and in fact, everything that is strategic to the organization, I think, should be dealt with by this group, or by a central group. Why? It's not just about higher things in the way, it's about more general things. It's how everything fits together. And that's why, I really wanted to bring this to this group, because there's a potential problem with having, like the technology and governance group just doing this, and then no one else does it. So what is the point of having that group kind of thing? So there's governance comes into this, and strategy comes into this, and other things, and they really have to be joined together. And if they're joined together, all of the people who are handling a special subtask for the organization, such as marketing and communications or something like that, then has an immediate connection to that group, which is, I know exactly what's happening in the bigger picture. I know exactly where we're fitting into that bigger picture. I know exactly the importance of what we're putting into that bigger picture. And I know all of the most important stuff that I need to now tell my team about what's happening in the bigger picture as well. So we're shortening those communications absolutely as much as we possibly can. There's a danger of something called Chinese whispers, and one of the best examples is a joke. What is it? It's three old blokes walking down the road, and one guy says, "Windy today, isn't it?" And the other guy goes, "No, it's Thursday." And the next guy says, "Yeah, so am I. Let's go for a cup of tea." So that's the equivalent of getting into Chinese whispers, and how quickly things can go pear-shaped. And it's also important as to why we put things down on paper, nice and briefly as well, so that we can all keep off on the same hymn sheet. So one of the recommendations I would make would be that, if this is the core group, and I see it as the core group, then I think the core group ought to deal with all the issues to do with strategy, and to do with governance, and to do with, all the most important stuff, and to know all the stuff that's happening in the organization, because we've got the founders here with their intentions, and the early people, and all the rest of it, and that's really important, because they've set this intention for the organization. But we also need to be able to let go and now let it evolve. So however I want to grow my plant, all I can do is plant it on good ground and water it, and try and look after it, and say, well, crack on, you're going now, you've got a life of your own. Yeah, that's how I envisage the flower of life. What we have is a center pulling everything together. We have the specialist focuses overlapping with that, however many we need, dealing with however many of the sub-issues, and then having other groups coming off that. So, if we're using self-organizing teams, and we're organizing a cafe network, for example, then we could quite easily end up with, 100, 500 circles in the cafe network. But if they're all connected together through circles of, say, 10 or 12 people, then, excuse me, then that information can flow very quickly up the line, and it can be calibrated among, so if you've got 12 people chairing groups of 12, and then you've got 144 people represented in one circle with a direct connection to all of those people very quickly. So this is very flat, and the information can flow very quickly as well. Does that answer your question, Alejandra?
Yes, in a certain way. Maybe
Okay.
I need to put that like in practice. Also, I would like to know if it is like a good idea to implement some kind of exercises, like to how to deal with ego or something like that within the groups, or only you take action on that if it is if there is a crisis.
Okay, that's a cracking question as well. Yeah, I mean, I came at this from the systems and the organization sort of angle, but I've now got some useful stuff, I think, for personal development. and I think that could be something that we share. Because it is important that we try and bring as many people with us as possible, but at the same time that, you know, we look after them in a way, and that they know that they're cared for, they know that they're listened to, they know that they're valued, and they're given the opportunity to be able to talk in safe spaces, you know, with one or a small number of people, or in a group and stuff like that. And I think, yeah, it's really useful. You know, I've learned some. I don't like the thought of spending 30 years, you know, meditating in a cave at the top of a mountain. I prefer to do things a little bit quicker if I can. I prefer things a little bit more comfortable if I can. I like to do things that are efficient and effective, even if I might need to do them a few times. So sharing things that we can do personally in terms of our management of energy and give us some tools to deal with stuff like that. And the other thing is, you know, if we've got friends in the organization and wingmen and brothers and sisters and stuff like that, then if we know that that other person knows that stuff, then and we trust them and we like them, then they're going to be able to help us a lot more than most people are with that kind of stuff. So yeah, you know, you've identified something that I've left out, but I could put some stuff together on that pretty quickly, and again, you know, we could just co-create on that if you like.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandra.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Troy. Yeah.
So, yeah, I like everything I've heard, and this is multiple times I've heard it now, and I think it's great. And so my question is, what's taking us so long to implement this? It's wonderful. In fact, it could help us now at the Synergy Hub here in Mexico right now with some of the issues that I think are organically arising and emerging, and including some, like you mentioned, the spiritual superiority, or some of the intentions of people as it relates to the entire foundational principles of what the World Summit is about. And so I think that is key. So the other thing that I want to mention is that, you know, you reference corporations a lot, and I'm sure probably most of your experience, correct me if I'm wrong, is with paying clients, corporations, right? And what about nonprofits, or in this case, non-entities? And as it relates to money, and I think money fucks up everything basically, and skews intentions, the best of intentions, and people's motivations. So in a corporation where you can roll out these procedures or processes, it's because people have to. They're getting paid to do this, and so the corporation says, this is what we're going to do, let's do it. How does this work? How will it work when you roll this out, hopefully soon, with the World Summit? Without money, without, you know, the dynamics right as we speak right now are changing because the sponsorship has gone away. Major implications. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the money challenges that naturally arise, and people's survival instincts, and just the whole group dynamics of whether, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. Okay. I guess probably I've had more experience now with eco-spiritual and conscious communities and other voluntary projects than, you know, in the FTSE 100 management consulting world, you know, by far. And that's from squats in London to conscious communities in Sweden and prospective communities in Norway and in the UK and stuff like that. I'm not sure that money screws up everything. I think the love of money absolutely, definitely does. But, you know, you park the right tools in the right hand of the right person. It's like, you know, giving them a fishing rod and teaching them to fish instead of, you know, giving them the money and sending them around to the chip shop. What I would do in that kind of situation is, yeah, I think this is really important. In terms of this process, what I hope is, and the reason I don't want to rush it is that, and I'm encouraging you to think about it for one more week and come back with final questions before a decision, is I really want this to be seen to be we're absolutely sure about this, rather than it's a quick, easy sort of knee-jerk decision and it's not done properly, because I think that's really important that it's done properly. But in terms of things like the sponsorship, back to target setting, was there at some stage a target set, and was that all predicated on certain things happening? And do we now have a chain of events, which is like stacking bricks on top of each other, where they all absolutely rely on that? If so, we need to be able to go back and question the absolute foundations of what we're dealing with, perhaps. It may be that it can still work like that, but if not, then it's information. And maybe the first thing that the universe is saying is that some things have changed here. Do we need to start to reconsider? Can we be doing things in a different way? Maybe it'll be a better way. Maybe it'll be a quicker way. Maybe it'll be a more effective way. But if it's all predicated on money, then that's an irony, isn't it? Because it's like, I'll mention him because I know him and I like him, Michael Tellinger, having Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a fantastic idea, and he's a fantastic guy, and I really like him. I've met him a few times, and we get on well. But there always seemed to be an irony to me, which is, okay, we want to go moneyless, and by the way, we want someone to give us the money to do this. And it's like, surely, you know, that is an irony, okay? So, and it's not a resonance. And on that basis, that influenced a lot of my thinking. That then, okay, I'm going, all right, well, what should we be doing? What should I be doing? My thoughts were profoundly influenced by that, in terms of, okay, what I think we should be doing is trying to build a bridge. And you know, that's the ultimate irony, is we need money so much, but we want to get away from money so much. Maybe what we should be thinking of instead is, how do we plug into this system to allow certain elements of it to flow with intention and a certain energy towards a specific place that we wanted this to go to, which is for a higher purpose and the good of all. So yeah, if that's a strategic thing, and I've only just learned of that, Troy, so I can only wing it as an answer, I would say, okay, what is predicated on that decision and that assumption and that target? What other ways can we look at this? If we're committed to that, and there's no reason why we need to totally decommit from it, what can we put in place to try and bring in those funds to cover that gap? And if not, what other ways can we look at this so that we can still manifest what we're doing and maybe do it in a better way? Because there's information, and maybe this is the universe saying, hang on, folks, there could be a better way.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure.
Robert and I just had a meet and greet with Craig Lewis, who is down at Josh Passmore's Eco Type Center in Costa Rica. And he just told us about his ideas for making money, but giving it back, you know, and supporting communities there, setting up little pods of retirement homes or a synergy hub, converting a hotel and some outbuildings, and people can go there and work. They can spend half the day working and half the day supporting the community by doing whatever tasks need doing. But I noticed he was quite money focused. So he's got lots of businesses. He's looking at real estate now. He's done lots of other things. But something he's really passionate about was that in Newfoundland in Canada, they've got 100 million tons of graphite. And he sees that as being able to support the ecology because it can be used to create, less energy and less pollution and desalinate water and things like that. So his idea is to get this business going, to really use that store of natural resource there to start really making it work for them, and then pooling the money back in that they make from the graphite sales and products back into the community, and not just their little eco community, but the poor people that he observes living around the community in Costa Rica. So that's my contribution.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's something there in terms of maybe the World Summit could start to live like a fractal, to live out some of those principles. So from that point of view, it's very appealing that we are involved, within a working synergy hub, kind of getting our fingers dirty and doing all of that. So that's just, one kind of angle. But I think you've given us so much food for thought, and everyone's listened so intently, which I think it's a tribute to how well you know your stuff and you can explain it all like nobody else could ever hope to explain it as well as that. So I think that's probably going to be, unless there's somebody else that needs to air a question or a view, I think that's probably a big enough chunk to digest for one sitting. And I propose that we have another sitting. That was your proposal, Mike, that we, for the next meeting, have another final question and answer, and then we decide how to go forward.
Yeah, I know that might seem excessive, but I think there's a document as well. People can skim the slides and things like that, because this is important. This is probably the most important decision that this organisation ever makes. It could be absolutely the difference between success and failure, or riven by politics and personality and all sorts of weird stuff that pops up in incoherent systems. So what I'm assuming is that there may be, because people need to be able to own this and do it. That's really important. It's not about talking about it. We've got to actually do it. If that's the case, then more questions might pop out. But on that basis, someone might also say, I don't like this. I think we should be doing this instead. Great. Let's have the discussion and then have the decision. And then just let's do it.
Yeah. So when you say let's do it, I don't know what let's do it means. Can you lay out a roadmap of how we implement this and what the actual things are in doing it?
Yeah, Troy, I would make a few suggestions straight away. The first one is that I think that there should be, instead of having a dual chair, I'd go for one chair for a longer period. Let them really learn the job. Let us really learn them, and let them bring some consistency into what is otherwise a difficult task. It's like, we have to keep learning to do the job and have the other person doing the admin function. And we're just blessed that the people who've done this job have been so good and so dedicated in terms of what they're doing, but let's not push our luck. So that would be the first recommendation. The second recommendation then is that on that basis, there are certain things that should continue, which is things like the agenda and stuff like that. But then every group is like, okay, if we've not got a chair, then we elect a chair. They're going to be the ones who become really familiar with this stuff. They're going to be the ones who say, okay, we've got a project. Now we're going to just flow the energy into this, which is who's got an idea. I'll make sure you get heard. Do you have an alternative idea? Do you have an improvement on that idea? Because I don't like it is not going to fly. It doesn't bring any solutions to anyone. And we also get a little bit of practice in with things like listening circles. Let's pick something real. Let's pick something hard. People that, something that might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. A listening circle on, are we going in the right direction maybe in the World Summit if it's all based on money? Are there other things that we can be doing? Let's have an opening of the hearts and a real sharing on that. Because if nothing else, we're going to get a much deeper understanding of each other through that process, and a respect for that openness of communication and for other people's positions. And let's do an action learning circle, which is okay. How do we do what we do? Because I know that people have observations on this is slow, this could be going quicker, I don't feel I'm being heard and stuff like that. Well, let's go through that. Let's make sure that we use these and build these into learning so that we just get better and better and better. Because if I was going to be a soldier, I wouldn't want to be at the very bottom of the heap. I'd want to feel at least I could be like in the SAS or something like that. I want, let's be really, really, absolutely bloody brilliant at what we're doing. And if we are, then we're going to attract so many other brilliant people and brilliant organizations. And that's the way I think we need to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'm totally on board. I'm just wondering if you can actually map out and present to us this is what we're walking into. This is the next steps, like the tangible things, right?
Read, learn, acquire the information, print out, if you like, or save the little bits that really apply to the stuff that you need to do. Let's make sure that we have a chair and an admin person for each group, and they know what they need to do as well. And they will also start to pick up the patterns. So one of the patterns is, okay, we really need to send people information out before each meeting. They need to have the Zoom link. We've got a number of different systems. It confuses people, stuff like that. Let's get it absolutely swinging. So this is like runs like a machine.
Well, right. But what I'm asking, Mike, if as part of your proposal, and that's what we're all going to decide on next week, I guess. I mean, can you lay out, say, this is the next steps, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do? Because I'm still having a hard time actually seeing how it will play out. I understand it all conceptually and love it, but how will it actually play out?
Yeah, I'd just implement it straight away. Basically, Troy, and the chair, I'd be happy to talk to the chairs of each group, and to and I can stand back and try and just sit in the set advisor position, if you like, of just trying to support those people and help them to be able to improve what they're doing as well. But this is the beauty, is it's not complicated, Troy. I'd just be going, okay, this is the format we're going to implement, which is that we're running on an energy circle. From time to, if we've got any issues to deal with that we really need to now bring out into the open and deal with, then we'll have an energy circle about that. And let's once a month have a little sub meeting, which is going to be on how do we do what we're doing, how do we improve what we're doing, etc. And that's it.
Okay, so how does that fit in with our every day? We've got a meeting by one of the slices. So how is it you're going to play this out 7 times with 7 different slices?
To talk slices, but if not, then I would say, if the UCT makes this decision, this is how we are going to work. This is how we are going to embody sociocracy and holacracy. Then here's your toolkit, folks. Talk to Mike, watch the video, and especially the chairs of those groups. If you need any help or support, the door's always open. And let's just do it. It's going to be like riding a bike. How do you describe how to ride a bike? Well, there comes a stage where you got to run, we got to jump on and pedal like hell.
There are 2 different approaches being put forward. One is that Grant was saying we ought to have a meeting of everybody together, like an energy circle, just so that we can get the basics right. And the other one is what you've just proposed, that let's just start with all the flower of life groups.
I'm easy, actually. What does everyone else feel? I mean, I think, you know, Grant's got a point, which is where do we start people, and maybe that also relates into what you're saying, Troy, which is okay. We have a meeting where everyone who hasn't seen this stuff comes in and gets the presentation.
Yeah.
You know, the issue is just going to be timing, but on that basis, then the expectation is that if you're in any of the World Summit groups, then this presentation is going to be for you. And if you can't be there to ask questions or whatever, then make sure you watch the video or whatever. But there needs to be an exchange after that, which is okay. What does this mean for us? How do we do it? What else do we need to do? Anything missing?
I've got a comment to make, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Mike, first of all, bravo with your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. Second, when we talk about spirituality, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm also very straightforward. I don't like to beat around the bush. If there's something that needs to be said, it needs to be said. I mean, we can't always go around it. We just need to be recht door zee, as they say in Holland. How do you translate that? It's straightforward, isn't it? Straightforward, and sometimes that's needed. When it comes down to the money situation, we don't really have the luxury to do certain things or keep discussing it. Sometimes the money situations become critical and it needs to be worked on. That's one of the reasons people came over to Playa to work in one of the three sectors, either fundraising, outreach, or administrative duties. These are things that are kind of straightforward, that can be done immediately. At the moment, fundraising is a critical point that needs to be done. We have less than 7 months now to the main event. We can't keep talking the way we are talking now, if I may be so blunt. Things need to happen. We are not trying to change the whole paradigm ourselves, but we need everybody's help with that. We need more people on board, and with those more people, like you said as well in your presentation, we get better solutions, and we're going to have better decisions being made. Less than 7 months is now something become a critical moment in time. We need to start working, and we need to start moving forward. So the jobs that are at the moment here in Playa del Carmen, I'm not sure if everybody gets it. There's only 1 of 3 tasks: outreach. That means that we need to reach out to our own individual networks, to other networks that are out there, get them on board, get people included within the UCT. We need to have people fully dedicated on fundraising. That's solely their task to do the fundraising. And then we need to have some people that do the administrative duties, because we can't do everything by ourselves because we are so thinly spread. That is something that needs to happen kind of immediately. We can't, sorry, let me finish, please, Panjit. It needs to happen kind of now, because like I said, time is short. 7 months until the main event, and so far as I know, we haven't even organized a plastic cup or a biodegradable cup to serve a drink in. So it's in my eyes, and this is me being straightforward, we need to start moving forward. I think your ideas are very good. I think they should also be implemented. I think it's a brilliant idea. However, some of the legwork needs to happen right now. If that doesn't happen right now, then I can see that the main event will fall on its ass, and it's not going to happen on the 1st of June. We need to keep to our timeline. If we want to reach our goals, then we need to get moving forward.
So what I think that you're doing, Tony, is that you are doing the pyramid model by saying what you've said, and you're keeping with like a random target setting mode of thinking. And I feel that everybody else has kind of got on board with the energy of what Mike's saying, and that we've agreed that we need to rethink and work as a conscious collective.
I agree that we need to work as a conscious collective, but I don't see why what that really has to do with reaching out to other groups, or what that has to do with fundraising or administrative duties that need to be done. We don't all need to educate ourselves to a certain level that we all know how we work together as a community. There's a few things, it's just the legwork, and that needs to be done. And that's not hierarchical. That's something that we've put in the job description when we put it out. That's why people volunteer to come over to Mexico. Now, that needs to be done. It needs to be done. We can't be sitting here, keep talking about things. If we want to do things, then, you know, let's do them. Some things are good enough for now, and some things are good enough to do right now. I, for one, I'm not going to start blurting out my personal life, but I'm struggling financially. So I've started up a web shop that's going to start selling World Summit products, so we can actually hopefully get some money in that we can pay our GBIs and get people on the phones, on emails, and start reaching out, get more fundraising done. These are the things that need to be done. Everything else that Mike suggests, which I totally agree with, is something that can be done, and it would be a very good model to start creating an interim transition. But we don't really need that model to pick up the phone and say, hey guys, this is the World Summit, would you like to join us, etc., etc. Let's set up a Zoom meeting, you know, let's get to know the team, and there we go. Fundraising, same thing, pick up the phone, send an email, and get that sorted out. The people that are within, that then take on the rest of those duties that come afterwards, that can be done either by the administrative team, or that can be done by somebody else who is more versed in it. And that's where the presentation that you gave us, Mike, will be very, very helpful. But we do have to take ownership. We do have to take leadership. That doesn't mean like I'm your leader. No, that means everybody is a leader. And we have to take some kind of responsibility to move forward. Now, if that's, and I'm going to be very blunt here because I don't know how else to say it, but if that's not going to happen, then I do not know what we're doing here, because we need to move forward. Less than 7 months, and we haven't even got a place to hold the event. We haven't even got a cup. We haven't got anything yet. So I don't know how others feel about this, but it's some things need to be done and some things that need to be put into place. And there are some things that can be organized via the way that Mike suggests.
No, Tony, I think everything has to be organized this way with respect. And I think that you're in real risk of setting targets without having the foundations in place. So one of the things that I've heard, for example, was, you know, we ask the groups to fund us. And, you know, I've been doing this since 2012. And I met a heck of a lot of people at breakthrough energy conferences and stuff like that. And I have to say that I haven't yet met a group, even, you know, someone who's got very high profile across the world, like Michael Tellinger, doesn't have money. So I don't see that proposition, which everything else is being founded on, has been actually actively investigated and questioned. And I think this is really classic, Tony, is then trying to set everything according to that target and drive those parameters. And I think that's very, very dangerous. And I think also using that as a, we must be unified and everyone else must do this, this and this, that has to be absolutely set aside, Tony. That has to be, the group is the group, the collective consciousness, we need to have the basic discussions, we need to have basic investigations, and it's the group who need to decide. And if not, then I think you need to be very, very careful about what you wish for, because if an organization doesn't live its values, then there's a real risk that what's going to happen is that people are just going to bomb burst and go and do other things. Now, even that I don't see as being a big problem, because people tend to get back together again and do things. But you're talking straight, I have to also talk back straight. And I think that there's a lot of unexposed assumptions in what you're talking about, which are potentially very, very problematic. And we need to be old enough and wise enough and fair enough to be able to exchange an absolutely basic level of information and say, is it correct to invite people out here if we don't have the funding in place? Is it correct to set a date for an event if we don't have those parameters in place? And up to this moment, we don't even have a way of agreeing at team decisions. So that to me is all really problematic, Tony. And I think that what we should do is to take this week to deeply reflect on the implications of the way that we have been operating in this. If not, then all those birds are going to come home to roost.
Can I just chip in here? I'm hearing and I'm seeing the same dynamic I've seen every single time, pretty much what you said, Mark. But there's one thing that just a constructive input I'd like to be able to offer here, to be able to give everybody their position to be able to operate. Because I mean, we're all coming in from a collective conscious perspective, and on the other hand, there's each one of us have actually got a particular project that we've introduced, or that's introducing us. Now, the one thing that nobody's done, including Michael Tellinger, anyone, okay, is nobody has represented both at the same time. Okay. Now, if we want to have any of our projects become, we have to have the structure, but what I'm noticing is that the World Summit crew is the next wave, okay? And every wave that's come before, every ripple that's come before has come in representing the structure. And again, this is where we're going with the World Summit. And so for me, for the first time, and we're in the position to do it this time, because you talked about structure, Mark, and it is very, very key to be able to actually bridge this process, because you need to bridge it. And I had a discussion with Pamjit, and we've had a fairly lengthy discussion on it a couple of times. And the co-creation tool that we're referring to, for me, the center of that co-creation tool is not the World Summit. Okay? The center of that co-creation tool is us. It's the collective conscious. It's the, all right? It's where we are all represented, and that is the structure. That is our birthing point. That's where everything happens. But we are all connected to all of it, and the World Summit is one of those fractals connected to it. So, for example, if I was using source feed as one of the things that would enter into the story of the stuff that I've got to bring forward, like each one of us have got to bring forward, then I've got to have equal importance, but in fact, almost more importance on the collective model than the actual personal structure or the organization that we're actually running. So, for example, or facilitating, the World Summit cannot take precedence over the collective conscious. So I think it kind of supports what Mark's saying, but at the same time, I get Tony's frustration, because it does come down to bridging. It all comes down to bridging. But I think if we actually can see that both aspects are being taken care of at the same time, and if any other organization comes in here and they see it just as the World Summit, you can say bye-bye. Because when it was New Earth, the Global Sovereign Alliance, or whether it's Ubuntu, it doesn't matter who it is, it's eventually goodbye, because the ego puts the one in front of the other. And they are both one and the same thing. Yet they are, each one of them are doing different things. So hence, if the World Summit wanted to actually score a big prize here, is introduce the collective, introduce the new net, us, without actually anybody branding it, but us just adopting it. And hence the central point is not the World Summit, it's us. And as much as Ubuntu will fit into us, so will the World Summit, so will New Earth, so will everyone. And that's the thing that everybody is, I guess, none of us would have arrived at this point if we didn't realize that we had to come into this resonance zone. And that resonance zone is that place of the Earth, of the planet that we're manifesting off and birthing from, and giving us the opportunity to actually do all these things, including the World Summit or Source Feed or anything that we're doing, free world, you know, that everything is requiring the collective to be represented. And I think the World Summit should be introducing that straight away. So hence in terms of the fact of the source feed, which Mark, when we spoke about you doing the presentation, then I said after that, at some point I'd like to unlock that little presentation. It may not even be necessary, but because I haven't seen the fractal co-creation actual design. I've seen it and I think I understand it, and I'm happy with it. And hence I said to Pamjit, if the Earth goes in the middle, and that's us, and the rest of them is talking to us, and us is talking to it, and everybody that's got something to say will have their own chairmanship in their own structure that they're introducing. So in a sense, there's no real even chairmanship. I mean, even chairmanship for me is kind of something that deems to be a little bit autocratic. But it's kind of, you know, you have to have some sort of organization. So I accept that. So I'm just saying that it's not exactly, I wanted to present this so that we could actually see how we could actually enter ourselves into something that's not about the various different organizations we represent. And the World Summit has the arduous task of introducing this for the first time. And it's an opportunity for us to actually break this difference between the structure we're representing here and the actual collective. Those two things need to meet now.
My battery's going to go, so with respect, I'm going to bow out of this because of that.
Can I just put in a thought there about what David Kahn, was it Kahn, said when he joined the group meeting last week? And he said about how he was perfectly willing to sponsor us to a great extent for the event in June. And that would be with the understanding that he could use our event as a model and a springboard for his own event in August. So when Tony says nothing's been organised, not even a paper cut, I don't think that's true, because it sounds like we've already got a synergy with somebody who's prepared to sponsor us. And I was thinking to, you know, interview him and just find out a little bit more about that. So that's perhaps something that we can talk about at the next meeting that we have.
Thanks, Denise. Okay, I think we're chairless. If Parmit's gone. So yeah, I think you guys need to have some discussions actually, because I just want to flag up one thing, and that is that, you know, if we're going to operate on these principles, that is, it's everyone's group and everyone makes the decisions, and that means that you guys as the founders need to understand that, you know, it means that all of us participating in this model have to let go of things. The assumptions, the attachments to certain ideas, it could turn out to be quite different to what you've anticipated. But if that surrender takes place, then I think it's got every chance of being something that's organic and can grow. And if it can't, then it can't be sociocracy, and it can't be holacracy. And you know, I think that those really basic questions need to be considered. I'm not at all attached to the outcome. I mean, I'd love it to work, but you know, I know what manifests and what doesn't manifest. So, but you guys need to have some basic discussions, I think, and to really, you know, maybe even come back with some more questions next week.
I think I can speak for Tony and myself that we don't want to be considered the founders. You know, let's move beyond that. Let's even beyond co-founders. We're all co-founders. We want this thing to take off and blossom and grow beyond just us. Believe me, we want that to happen, and we're not attached to it. However, we do see that there's some danger that we will fall back into recreating wheels or addressing symptoms if we're not paying attention to some core foundational principles that many of us here have co-created. And so your whole concept about intentions is huge. And I think we've already experienced some challenges with that, some delegates coming here that maybe had different intentions than what we had. So absolutely, let's do this and turn it. I trust in the collective consciousness of larger groups. We've been trying to grow out of the smaller group syndrome that we've been under. And I think we have done that by all of your presence, and that's great. It's taken us to the next level. So now we're ready to go to the next level beyond that and have at it. Seriously, go for it.
I'd like to add something to that. I mean, the World Summit is nothing more than a bunch of guys that want to organize an event where all the groups are coming together. It's not the World Summit's a responsibility to create the collective consciousness. It's the responsibility of the groups that are coming in. They should be the ones that should be talking to them. We are the ones, and we have invited people to help us to connect groups, to start organizing the event. We have to be unbiased, we have to be unjudgmental. The only thing that we are really doing is trying to organize the event, is reaching out to other people. Whatever else happens is not really the responsibility of the World Summit. This is where we see a little bit of frustration, because we are trying to recreate another wheel within the World Summit, whilst the World Summit is just a bunch of people that are trying to reach or ask other people that have joined the World Summit to reach out to their networks and say, look guys, there is an event coming, we need you there. Please select some or deselect people that are experts within their field that can actually bring forward these tangible ideas that will cover the 12 sectors. The World Summit doesn't have to resolve those 12 sectors. The only thing that we're wanting to do is bring you guys together, get you guys talking. And I think that at times that we have become too immersed in it, and I think maybe it's time for some of us to step back and say, like, look guys, the only thing that we're doing is we're trying to organize this event. It's like a pop festival, you know, somebody's selling the tickets, somebody else is promoting it, and somebody is reaching out to other people. That's all we're doing. We're not telling the artist how to sing, what to sing, and what color stage they want.
I would prefer to see that the World Summit actually celebrates the achievements of handling collective consciousness until you actually have the World Summit itself to celebrate exactly that. Okay, I really do see that it's actually one and the same thing. But at the end of the day, you're never going to get the World Summit to succeed, okay, if you don't deal with the collective conscious issue. And that is the structure. So I'm telling you now that in my different discussions, talking to the crew that's in Mexico, I'm saying that it's one thing to be sitting in Mexico arranging the World Summit. It's another thing to be sitting in another country trying to be part of a network that you're not necessarily having the actual physical luxury of sitting day to day and communicating with individuals. So for me, there's two things happening here. The one is that I understand from a conscious network perspective that the World Summit is the next wave, okay? And hence my involvement in it. There's another thing that I will, as soon as conveniently possible, which I'm doing all the time, press the issue that the structure has actually got to be in place for you to be able to invite other people, because if you are actually much further ahead than you actually realize of the World Summit. That's what's so interesting here, is that you may be seeing that, you know, the event and the party, you shouldn't be worrying about the numbers. I really think that that's, again, a very kind of like a dualistic way of looking at it, because the numbers are not important. And the fact that you might have a few World Summits happening at the same time to celebrate it not just in one place, when I say parties in one place or festivals, the real-time dynamic of it is not how many, it's how structured and how functional it's moving forward. So I think we have the arduous task of literally facilitating the network that everybody has chosen to resonate into and from and become and manifest. So, and the likes of, you will not draw any persons like the real different founders of the different organizations, or even the different organizations, if you are not tackling the next thing which nobody's succeeded in, which is the structure and the continuation of this thing. So the World Summit is in a very good position to have even a little party in June. But your party gets bigger because we're all in it around the world, okay? So it's not just a party on the ground, it's one at the same time. So I'm just saying, guys, give yourself a lot of credit for what you've done so far, and understand that you've actually got a lot going on here. And I understand totally your frustration. I understand the dynamics. As I said to Parmjit yesterday, I said there's a whole lot of things happening in my life here that nobody even realizes has a huge impact on exactly what you're doing. But yet nobody knows what that is, okay? And that's because I haven't even entered into it, because we haven't got the structure to continue with it, because I've had these conversations over and over and over again for the last 10 years, trying to convince people of what it is that I'm trying to bring forward. Now I've got other people here showing me that needs to be brought forward. And there's a person sitting here that's saying that there's structure. And I'm going, okay, that's one of my boxes ticked. There's structure. I'm coming in with authentication. I'm coming in with clarity in terms of where we are requiring to be at. And Mike, I hear, is saying how you structure to get to that. And Tony is saying, I want the paper cups. I want to have a party. And I'm going, well, I fully get that. Let's make all that happen. Okay. If every individual here is not given what they require to manifest, to add into this collective conscious, they've got to realize that the collective conscious is going to give it to you. It's not the other way around. Sorry, I have to say that.
Thanks, Gaetan. I'm not sure, guys, if what your energy level is now. Maybe some still want to respond, or you feel like we are getting to a closing.
Okay, I think we should leave it at that. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm not sure we're going to add much at this stage, but I want to thank everybody for listening and for their questions and stuff like that. And you know, guys, don't be afraid of going back to the basics and asking questions. And you know, you've attracted a lot of people to you, and but ask them, trust them, ask them about everything. What do you think? And put your trust in them. And you know, everything will be good. So yeah, I think we're done. I wanted to thank everyone for their questions and their input, and wish Alejandra a speedy recovery.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. I would like just to add something. In your roadmap proposal, can you put how frequent we can do this, the listening circles and the circles that you were talking about? And I think that this is a great opportunity. Going backwards, it doesn't mean that we are going to the past. It means that we have an impulse to go faster to the objective that we want.
Yeah, if you're going to build a house, make sure it's got a bloody good foundation.
Mm-hmm.
If you have, you can build a castle.
Yes.
And it'll work.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Thanks,
Bye
guys.
for now.
See you next time around.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and well done.